So thank you everyone for tuning in to our Research Connect series. I'm happy to see some familiar faces, some new faces. My name is Chloe Wong-Mercer. I'm a CDTRP trainee, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar with Dr. Suze Berkhout. So I'm a social work student here at McGill University, and I've been working with Dr. Suze Berkhout for about 2 years now on the Frictions of Futurity project, a multimodal research project that's brings together the social sciences, arts-based methods, digital storytelling, which we'll hear about in a little bit, and some kind of discourse analysis of patient manuals as well. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that the CDTRP is hosted by the University of Alberta, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous people, including the Cree, the Blackfoot, the Métis, Nakota, Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. And I'm based in Montreal, also known as Tiohtià:ke, which is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka peoples and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So I invite people to write their land acknowledgements in the chat box below and introduce yourselves. And we'd also like to acknowledge and thank AstraZeneca and the CIHR, whose generous support we could not have had to host these sessions without. So before we dive into the main content, Erica has a couple of announcements from the CDTRP.
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. Sorry, 1 second. Today I have 2 announcements for everybody. Dr. Caroline Tate is the head of our Indigenous platform, and we're super excited to be announcing that she will be hosting a Café Scientifique webinar called Pathways to Truth and Reconciliation in Organ Transplantation and Donation. This event will be held on February 27th. So from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Dr. Tate will be focusing on Indigenous people within Canada, and then again from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, she'll be focusing on Indigenous people outside of Canada, specifically within Australia and New Zealand. This event will be free, and I will provide the registration link in the chat box. The second announcement is a save the date for our PFP platform. This year's Patient, Family, and Donor Research Forum will be held virtually on June 13th and 14th. Registration will also be free, and it can be done through our website. The link to register will be live soon, so keep your eyes out for that. Thank you.
And before I introduce the speakers, I also have a few housekeeping notes as well. So today's session is recorded and will be posted on the CDTRP website and their YouTube channel. So during the presentation, if you could please keep your mics off just to avoid the feedback. And if you have any questions or comments, you can raise your hand with the raise the hand button, or type them into the comment chat and we'll be sure to address them throughout. And I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Suze Berkhout. Dr. Berkhout is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and an affiliate at the Institute of History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the University of Toronto. They are an early career clinician, investigator, and practicing psychiatrist, and their program of research is Feminist Science and Technology Studies, utilizing ethnographic, narrative, and arts-based methods to explore social and cultural issues that are impacting access and navigation to healthcare systems. They love coffee and thinking about how to complicate the narratives we share with each other in medicine. So we're all very excited, and I'll pass it over to Dr. Berkhout.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. If you're in, I guess everyone is afternoon now. so across the country. It's a pleasure to get to be here, and I'll introduce. There's a within our group today, there are a number of people from the project that we're going to be talking about, and I'm really thrilled that two of those people are Bill and Gord. I don't see Stephanie, but that's they might be working. And I'll give everyone a proper introduction, but Bill Stearman and Gord Jones are two of the transplant recipients filmmakers who joined with our project and whose films we're going to be screening today as we talk about stories, and in particular digital stories, as a research approach to thinking about survivorship and complexity in liver transplantation. We're talking about liver transplantation, but really I think that there's probably a lot of themes and issues that are going to cross other areas of transplantation and donation. And so I'm very happy to hear people's reflections on things that stand out to you, that relate to you and relate to your experience as well. I'll share my screen now. And oh, sorry, one sec. I'm going to stop that because to show the films, I need to make sure that my sound is shared. All right, so my kind of aim today is to talk about stories as method. I'm going to invite in other people to talk as we go. It's also, I'm very happy for things to be a little bit informal. And so if people want to interrupt and ask a question, get clarification, please feel free to do so that this, has a dialogue kind of feel to it. I also wanted to acknowledge that I'm presenting from Toronto, or Toronto, which is the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat people. Wanted to recognize, of course, the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And as we share our learning, teaching, and research practices within our virtual space, that we pay respect to the Indigenous custodianship and the knowledge embedded in that within our places. This is an arts-based research project that I'm going to be talking about, and we're talking about a component of it, which was a project called the Temporalities of Cure project. But this Temporalities project is kind of embedded in a larger body of arts-based practices that are part of what's called the Frictions of Futurity and Cure project. And that is Kelly Fritsch is also here today. Hi, Kelly. I saw your name in the screens. And so Kelly is the co-PI on this project and based out of Carleton University. And I also saw Mary Bunch, who's here, who's one of the co-investigators on the project. Hi, Mary. It's nice to see you again as well. Mary had been one of the people who really helped to lead off this component of the work, which is the digital storytelling part. And then you heard from Chloe, who Chloe will also kind of, we'll invite Chloe in to speak as well in a little bit. Chloe is one of the graduate students who really spearheaded all of the work that was happening to keep the digital storytelling practices that we were doing organized and moving along, and really sort of spearheading a lot of the research work with it. And then we were very fortunate to work with three incredibly talented professional filmmakers, Shabnam Sukhdev, Leah Tarachansky, and Fraser Best. And Fraser was also an artist in residence within our project and explores within documentary film his own experience of liver transplantation. And some of you who are here may have been part of the CDTRP event that we've had in the past, which was a film screening of one of Fraser's short films, a short film that he created about his relationship with his donor. And so we've done a whole bunch of different things, and it's just a wonderful opportunity now to get to showcase the work of some of the partners that we had within the project who are liver transplant recipients themselves, who then created films about their transplant experience. So I'm going to talk a little bit about qualitative research and about digital storytelling in particular, and then we'll kind of get into the films and screen the films and have what I hope is a really rich discussion with our filmmakers. I would put up that there's some, Kelly and I have been funded through the New Frontiers Research Fund, through SSHRC, through the University of Toronto, as well as the CDTRP has very generously provided innovation funds to help us work with this project. And as I mentioned, the professional filmmakers who were here did receive some honoraria for their time. And we're really honored that Stephanie, Bill, and Gord are sharing their works with us today. So what we'll kind of get into talking about now is what's sort of unique about qualitative research, and qualitative research along different kinds of dimensions is going to be quite different than what people might be used to in more quantitative or biological or biomedical research. So really a lot of difference in terms of what counts as data, how we collect data, how we analyze data, and how we generate knowledge. And so I thought I would just sort of start us off by thinking a bit about some of those differences and then move into talking about narrative methods specifically. And I won't sort of, what we really want to do is screen the film, so I won't take too long to talk about that, but I think it'll be a really helpful orientation to the Research Connects session today. And then we want to screen the 3 films by Gord, Stephanie, and Bill. I did also include another film because one of the things that we had done as this was a research project that carried on over the span of more than a year, was that we had done more than one digital storytelling workshop. And so I've included one of the earlier films that we did just to give you a flavor of some of because there's such a different array of ways that people might engage in filmmaking. You'll see different kinds of styles, you'll see different parts of their narrative. And one of the things that we were interested from a research standpoint was to understand how things like writing prompts or how things like different group practices within the filmmaking of the workshop, how those might shift what kinds of films people were making. And so that sort of one of the research questions as a methodological kind of question is about how we work with people around making films and what kinds of films and stories are told. And so I thought I would share with you a little bit about the process of the workshops and show some of the different kinds of things that we had done in those. So we're going to screen Bill, Stephanie, and Gord's films. And then I hope that in our discussion, we can really think a little bit about things like the visuals, the temporal, so the flow, the rhythms of the films, different sound qualities, the narrative styles of the films, and really sort of understand what different kinds of choices these 3 filmmakers were making, how that helps us understand aspects of liver transplantation and survivorship in transplantation that may not otherwise get captured by things like quality of life scales or by sort of more standard kinds of quantitative measures. So this is my intro slide to what are the differences between quantitative and qualitative research. And I see Chloe smiling a bit. And so you can, if you've done both forms of research, this might speak to you, but qualitative research does tend to be quite different in terms of the approaches and how it's structured, but that doesn't make it less rigorous. It has its own ways of being a rigorous form of research, but it does tend to get thought of as a lot more sort of hand gestury and less, and it sort of gets treated as a lesser cousin in the research world. But this is the way that I like to think of some of the differences of them. And really the thing to take away from this is that different research methods orient us to knowing the world in different ways. So if we think about a topic like long-term survivorship and transplantation, if you have a question about who experiences complications from transplant and what kinds of complications and what are the risk factors for different kinds of complications, you don't want a qualitative study to tell you that. Like you don't want to tell you want to have a cohort study, you want an epidemiological study. And so those specific kinds of questions around risks and the relationships between risk factors, that's a set of questions that a methodology like an epidemiological study is going to help you with. If what you want to do is say, what are the best, sort of dose ranges, or what's the timing of different kinds of interventions? How low can we lower the the steroid and still have good immune suppression? Those kinds of questions are really best answered by a randomized control trial, right? If you're testing an intervention and you want to know, is it just as good to give X amount of prednisone versus Y amount of prednisone, you again are not going to do a qualitative study on that. But if what you want to do is understand why prednisone is a challenge for somebody, what makes it hard to take the medication, why survivorship is complicated at year 1 and somehow less complicated or maybe more complicated at year 5, that's, again, not the kind of thing that a cohort study is really going to give you the depth and the richness and the nuance of. So that's where you want to bring in things like qualitative methodologies. So really answering these kinds of things that are going to be much more contextualized for a particular time, a particular place, and a particular person, and not necessarily looking to have big, broad generalizations, but really understanding richness and depth and nuance. And so I will find the reference if anyone's interested, but I thought this is a really good kind of comparison between quantitative and qualitative research approaches. So in quantitative research, you're trying to confirm a hypothesis about a phenomenon, whereas it's much more exploratory in qualitative research. And we tend to use instruments and ways of approaching research in terms of data gathering that's much more flexible. It tends to be iterative. So we learn from our earlier research work that we were doing, and we apply that as we keep going. And we do not unlike in quality improvement studies where you do cycles of and iterations of improvement. In this case, we're doing iterations that help us refine our research questions and iterations that help us understand the data that we're gathering in different kinds of ways. And that's actually that actually makes for better research. It doesn't it doesn't introduce bias. It tends to actually make the research higher quality. And so that's quite a difference from when you try to set something up a priori, as you would in a quantitative study, and you want to follow things through with what you said you were going to do from the very beginning all the way through to the end. And so that's quite a big difference between the sort of general frameworks. Questions in qualitative research tend to be very open-ended. The data is very wide-ranging, so you might have text, you might have audio. In our case, we're going to be watching film. So the film and also the discussion amongst the filmmakers about their process of making the film is the kind of things that we study as researchers. And again, we talked a bit about that flexibility in study design. One of the things that Chloe will sort of briefly speak to is also about the ways that we ourselves changed the process of these digital storytelling workshops as we were doing them to try to understand more of the things that we were starting to see both in this project and in other parts of our projects. Now, narrative research methods are about telling stories, about the telling of events. We study how they're told and the meanings that are embedded in these tellings. And stories are this sort of main body of data. And the stories might be analyzed, they might be generated in different kinds of ways, but at the heart of them, they're really interested in experiential knowledge. So the storyteller is the knowledge keeper who is sharing their experiences, and the listener, researcher, is witnessing them, taking them up and understanding them as a meaningful way of knowing the world. And so narrative health research often is interested in issues like quality of life, barriers and facilitators to care, different kinds of care experiences for different people and at different times. And in a lot of ways, as a field, narrative research has been organized and oriented toward the expression of stories that have not been told or cannot easily be told, or stories that are marginalized. And that's sort of part of the history of narrative research, is trying to explore and understand what's unspoken or untold, or who hasn't been treated as a knowledge keeper or as someone who can share knowledge in a meaningful way. And so I will sort of, this is the last little bit about sort of the background to narrative research, but stories are powerful. They can be loaded, and then there's sort of a question about whether or not they can be dangerous. And I have colleagues who do work in mental health research and do narrative research, and one of the things that they've been particularly interested in has been the ways that sometimes institutions can take up stories and sort of use them in ways that perhaps a storyteller didn't intend to have them shared or experienced, and use them for other kinds of ends that actually go against what the storytellers initially had wanted to be able to share their experiences through. And then Alan Bleakley is a health humanities researcher who also kind of wondered about at one point in this article about whether stories can be the equivalent of an objectifying kind of medical gaze. Is it the sound equivalent of the kind of medical gaze? And is there a way that that happens? And so that's also something that is on a lot of narrative researchers' minds, is how do we kind of critically engage with stories, and how do we create a space where stories can be told in ways that pays attention to the reasons for the stories, how they get taken up, and the audience for them. And so we, in our project, in our research team, we, bring a kind of critical qualitative approach to the research that we do, which has meant that, we're interested in analyses that are kind of exploratory, that are generating knowledge, that knowledge isn't necessarily going to be kind of instrumental or outcome centered so much as exploring the something from the perspective of the people who we're working with, who are participants. In arts-based research, this is particularly, a lot of times people refer to this as emergent. We don't necessarily go in knowing with what the topics or what the issues or what the major challenges are. This emerges through the process of making art. And so the aims of critical qualitative research tend to be different than more instrumental research. So rather than really being kind of interested in getting the answer that's going to tell us how to reduce a symptom, what we're interested in is how does the process of meaning making happen? How do people live well? What are the existential kinds of issues? And that's the kind of questions that we were interested in this project. I will just maybe quickly, and I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we have lots of time for our films. So I will quickly say that that we, as part of the digital storytelling work that we did as a precursor to that, we were doing something called critical discourse analysis, and Chloe was part of that. And so, Chloe, I don't know if you want to say a word or two just about the discourse analysis and maybe how that impacted what we were doing in the digital storytelling workshops.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe what Suze was mentioning a little bit earlier about kind of the dangers of how medical institutions sometimes take up narratives. We started with discourse analysis to see first what kinds of stories exist in the biomedical world around transplant. And we decided to start with the liver transplant manuals, which is often this threefold package with the pre and post and coping transplant manuals that are given to patients. And we wanted to see what story and what narrative was given to patients and how that might affect their entry point into the transplant journey. And we looked at major themes. We also looked at the language that's being used in the manuals, how it's structured, to get at these common narratives and tropes that emerge and kind of get circulated within not just the institution, but also amongst patients and families, and just they come to form the kind of cultural script and what gets talked about in the transplant world.
Thanks, Chloe. And one of the reasons for doing that was so that we could shape the kinds of questions that we were working with the participants, so Gord and Bill and Stephanie and others. We wanted to ask different kinds of writing prompts. And so if we're trying to get at what are the unspoken or what are the hard to speak about aspects of transplantation or the things that don't get explored, you need to start by understanding what is it that like kind of, the institutional discourse is exploring. And so we were, some of the things that we had seen within that was that the manuals really orient things toward actuarial kinds of, so the numerical statistics around risks of X, Y, or Z kind of complication, but they really don't tell you what does it mean? How do you move forward while having had all these complications? What does that mean? Or so that's the kind of thing that we were looking to try to make sure that we could help people talk about in the digital storytelling workshops if they wanted to. We also did other work in the project so the larger project is an ethnography. We did art-based research methods. We're in interviews. People would also make art with our project team that we were analyzing, and also as a way to explore those issues of the unspoken. And so then the digital story, this sort of brings us to the digital storytelling workshops. And so we did a bunch of things that were kind of different from how digital storytelling happened kind of pre-COVID, in terms of like what were the kind of common practices that people might do pre-pandemic. And also we were really keenly aware that we were working with people who are more susceptible to infection, that kind of thing. So there were different kinds of modifications we had for how our workshops and how our work unfolded. And so these were online workshops with people from the liver transplant program at University Health Network. And really they were designed to help to work with people to explore some significant aspect of their transplant experience. And the kind of writing prompts and the kind of discussions that we had in the lead up to people actually creating their films were to help people create sort of a script or a story, something that they wanted to tell. The participants in each of the workshops worked with 3 filmmakers, and then there were also research team members. And we all kind of learned together different techniques for developing a short digital film that would tell some part of a person's experience. The research team was trying to provide a space for people to create these complex, layered, potentially nonlinear kinds of narratives. But as I think we found, and we're happy to talk about in the discussion, that as we went on, what we really found was that the space of the workshops also became a place to decrease sort of isolation, connect across with one another, and I think share different kinds of perspectives. And one of the things I think that a lot of people talked about in both sets of workshops was just how there were some parts of their experience that were very challenging to have anyone understand unless someone had gone through it themselves. And so to have people kind of come together in this workshop to create a film about their experience, they were creating something that could share some part of their experience to somebody who hadn't experienced it. But then also the camaraderie and the coming together of the workshop participants themselves was something that was really meaningful. And we have people who had made the films here. So Bill and Gord are here. So if you've got kind of more questions about that, I think I'm sure they'd be happy to kind of answer questions as we start sort of discussing. And so, and I think the other thing from a research angle is that we're really interested in film as a medium that lets people express things simultaneously. So if you imagine what it actually means to make a film, you might have a verbal script that you're narrating. But then you've also got things like either still shots or moving shots, and you've got things like other kinds of sound effects or scores, that kind of thing. And you're going to see sort of all these things kind of come together. And so what you have is this way to have a multiplicity of different kinds of messages or different kinds of meanings that can be held at the same time, and that they come together to make a whole story. And so that's one of the reasons why we were especially interested in film as a medium, because it really, it does something that's quite different than what sort of filling out a Likert scale or checkboxes is going to tell you in terms of the richness, particularly because a lot of times really complex experiences are ones where you might have different kinds of things, different kinds of paradoxes, different kinds of things that sit in tension and are happening together at the same time. And a film is the kind of thing that can let all of those things unfold. Film also moves through time. And so that was one of the themes that we were interested in this as well, which was a theme of temporality, and interested in what meanings were like for people and how they shifted over time. And films are something that that help you understand something about rhythm and flow and temporality. And so that was the other reason for wanting to be able to think about that, because again, if you think about a survey, those are cross-sectional. They are a slice in time, as opposed to something like a film, which sort of stretches over time. So I've talked way too much. Let's get to the films, which is the really exciting part of things. I'm going to show this film first. This was one of the films of the first rounds of workshops. So not Gord, Bill, or Stephanie's films, but this was a film that one of our early participants made. And this participant was actually invited back to help kind of introduce the digital storytelling practice to the next group of participants. And so I wanted to show his first, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about how we changed our practice. Again, that sort of keeps with that iterativeness of qualitative research.
My personal model year is 1959, our home 1979, and my hobby car is 1972. They need constant maintenance. I've always had a knack for fixing and repairing broken things. I've always looked at objects and seen how to improve and repair them, never considering that one day I'd be the one that needed repairing. I took for granted that my life was status quo, and it was humbling to see my frailty, my mortality. It was amazing to discover how much I relied on people around me to survive. When I was diagnosed with liver disease some years ago, I wasn't sure of what to do to calm my mental state. I tried to deal with my failing health by continuing to work and rebuild and repair my car and home as my health would allow. Ironically, I received a call for donor parts for my wounded car at about the same time as I received a phone call from Toronto General about a possible donor. Someone, some family, had gifted me with what I so desperately needed, a second chance. Their unselfish sacrifice had given me hope. Life. My work was not finished. I had things to do. I was needed.
Don't give up, we don't need much of anything. Don't give up, 'cause somewhere there's a place where we belong.
People were not giving up on me. How could I give up on myself? So many things came together magically in this one event for me to be renewed, rebuilt, reborn, May 14th, 2019.
Don't give up, please don't give up.
So that was a film by Mike Mora, and that was one from one of our first workshops. And I think the things that I think I want to just sort of highlight really quickly are that you have a score, and the score is kind of helping move a feeling along. And I think one of the things that the text which is the narration that it speaks to as well, you've got these tension, like there's a hopeful message, and the score kind of reflects that as well, and hopefulness and about sort of second chances, but also a kind of pressure around things to do. I've got things to do, and I think that's juxtaposed with other things that you hear in the narrative, which are about frailty and mortality and a humbling experience, and this potential of giving up on oneself, and this sort of anxiety and the stress and the mental state that kind of goes along with serious illness. And so I think we want the arc of the film and the arc of the story gives you that sense that there's this movement forward, but it also kind of makes space for these challenging experiences. And we can, we'll keep kind of talking about some of these components of the films that you see. But one of the things that we wanted to do after we did the first set of digital stories was was to modify the process. And so one of the things that we did in the digital storytelling workshops is that Chloe created a beautiful welcome package for everyone and to try to help orient people to the process. And we had different kinds of writing prompts. And so one of the things we wanted to do was kind of knowing that from this first group of films, we saw these kinds of tensions were there. We wanted to see what were different ways that we might, help people express that more. And so, Chloe, I don't know if you want to say anything just briefly about the way that we changed the process for the second round of digital stories, and then we'll get into screening the second round and have a discussion with our filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the first session, we heard quite a bit about how kind of daunting and overwhelming the process of creating a short film was like. And so we thought that bringing the first group in to talk about how they broke down and concentrated on certain aspects of their story didn't mean that, there was only one way of telling the story, but this one just captures one aspect of it. And then we also heard that a lot of the content from the weeks of the digital storytelling, which was over the course of 8 weeks, we had emphasized in the first round a lot more on teaching about filmmaking, on how to shoot and different techniques, which was interesting to some folks, but then not as interesting to others. And so others really wanted to focus on that one-on-one sessions with their filmmaker who facilitated how to build the story, what to concentrate on, and what kinds of images and metaphors, and helping with any technological difficulties. So the second round did kind of modify the layout and structure of this digital storytelling process, and we had a lot less big group sessions and more breakout into one-on-ones with the filmmakers directly. And we did, in that first meeting where the previous participants and the newer group came, we had heard about how important community building was for recipients, especially who had gone through their transplant during COVID. They wanted to talk with other transplant recipients, and they might never have had the chance to before. So that first session on kind of building that rapport and the trust and that sense of community was really important. And so that's what we kind of built into the second session.
And I don't know, maybe I'll pause here too for a second, just invite Gord or Bill. And I'm not sure if Stephanie was able to join today or not, but anything you want to add about kind of entering into the workshops, your thoughts at the start, or what it was like to kind of get into the process?
It was an overwhelming project to enter from the beginning. I like the way it was broken down. The group meetings at the beginning, we had like 3 or 4 get-togethers over a period of weeks about how to process it. And then the one-on-ones with Fraser was just invaluable, but how to put it all together. But a lot of it was reliving emotions and thoughts of that time that you've kind of pushed out of your mind. And then once you relive that, it made it better to express it. And the group was very professional in how we handled that. And it just I don't know if I'm going off topic or just rambling, but the way it was presented to us, it started off as an overwhelming project, and it broke down that it was just an exciting project by the end. And to look at the results of everybody's work, which is, wow, that was great. And just, I'm proud of myself and Bill and everybody who was involved with it. So that's all I got.
Thanks,
And I
Gord.
don't
Bill?
have a lot. Oh, I don't have a lot to add to what Gord said. It incredibly emotional that I wasn't expecting. I thought I was over all of that stuff, but when you put a group of us together, the emotion comes out. It was just also really nice to connect with others who'd been through it. I mean, if you haven't been through it, you really don't know. And the filmmakers, what an opportunity and what fabulous individuals they were. I'm really sorry that Leah's not here because I would thank her again and again for all the help that she gave me. She's quite a marvel. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And I think we'll move right on to watching the 3 films from this group. But I think Gord and Bill are really highlighting something that's important to think about from a research sort of team standpoint, which is that this is deeply emotional work, and people are diving back into, as Gord is saying, to parts of their stories that that they may have thought were kind of behind them in some ways. And so I think from a research team standpoint, thinking about what those processes are going to be and what the practices are going to be to help people through that is really important. So let's see. We've got Bill's film is first up.
My name is Bill Stearman. I am a quilt maker and a storyteller. I'm also 2 years post-liver transplant. Recently, I went with my daughter and her family to my grandson's grade 8 graduation. Watching my grandson and all the other graduates getting the rewards, I was moved to tears. When I thought about it, I realized that before my transplant, after my diagnosis of liver cancer, I wasn't expected to be here. The notion was that I wouldn't be alive, and if I was alive, I wouldn't be able to sit through something like this. And here I was, alive and well, and sitting with my daughter beside me, and my daughter's the one who gave me the liver, and I just wept. I am far more emotional. I don't try to hide the fact that I have these emotions. I mean, I feel everything. Every emotion is stronger and more intense than it ever was before. And I appreciate everything so much more. It's all just so incredibly, incredibly wonderful, and I am just filled with absolute, absolute gratitude. I want recipients to know that you will be different and your life will change. It'll change in ways that people can't prepare you for, but it's all good. After living through a liver transplant, there's nothing to be afraid of anymore. I am so grateful for every day that I have, every day that is new. I'm not the same person that I was before, but I'm here, doing things, feeling healthy, and I am happier than I've ever been in my life.
Thank you. I don't know if I can access my clapping hands, but beautiful, Bill. Thank you so much. We will maybe I'll pause for just a moment to see any reflections or any any thoughts. We'll have a kind of more robust discussion after we watched all the films, but if anyone's got any initial impressions or things that they want to share, please feel free, or you can pop it in the chat so that we can make sure that we are able to include that. I was struck again by the score. I love the score of the film, and thinking about the way that it has a sort of lullaby kind of quality to it, with the sort of the way that the repeating sounds, and that it sort of brings me a sense of kind of nostalgia, but also a sense of what's here and not here. Absence and presence were sort of part of that. And the score really was something that stood out to me this time. All right, I'm gonna move to, oh, sorry, here we go. And this is the film by Stephanie Miller.
In the summer of 2021, I received a life-changing diagnosis. I was diagnosed with end-stage liver disease, and I was told that I would need a new liver. I had been a nurse in the intensive care unit for over 15 years. I've always been on the other side, taking care of the patients. That diagnosis made everything stop. I felt like everything was moving around me, as though I was in the darkness, and I felt like there was no hope. I was in need of a liver transplant, and my best option was going to be a living donor. One afternoon, I got a call from the transplant team. I was told that I had an anonymous donor that matched me. This person, whom I did not know, decided to donate a portion of their liver to me. The surgery went well. The recovery longer than anticipated. But I can say now, because of my anonymous donor, who turned out to be another nurse that just saw a posting on Facebook and decided that she would like to help. Because of that, I've gotten a new lease on life.
Hold on, yeah. Welcome back. Stephanie's very busy today. She's attending this very sick patient.
Being a recipient of a liver is amazing. I am so thankful for my donor. I am so thankful for my life. I'm just happy that I'm able to move on and begin my life again.
So Congratulations, Stephanie, for a beautiful film. And again, we've got Gord's film to watch, and then we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. And so, again, I think the things that maybe I'm thinking about as I watch that are the pauses in the narration. There's some silence versus where there was different kinds of overwhelming sounds, like all the cacophony of the hospital, which was when Stephanie was talking about the experience of having the diagnosis and not knowing what was going to happen, versus this sort of a different kind of set of sounds. And then also the way that Stephanie's narration sort of reflects on the challenges of being on the other side, having been a healthcare provider and then now a patient. And so those are the things that really sort of stood out to me in this film. And now we'll watch our film from Gord.
My son came to visit me from out west 8 months after I was told I had liver cancer. With the door closing behind him, it hit me for the first time I was probably going to die, that I would be dead before my son and I ever had a chance to see one another again.
That was the only time while waiting for a new liver that I actually lost hope. But now here I am, 5 years later, I'm healthy and I'm happy. But it wasn't an easy road though.
It was the evening of April 20th, 2018, when the hospital called saying they had a liver for me. Walking into Toronto General, I was excited and quite scared. Around 11 p.m., I was taken to surgery for the operation. When I awoke an hour after surgery, my wife was already there at my bedside. I looked frail and horrible, and I felt worse. Tina needed to help me to the car and get in, as every movement was difficult and painful. Every bump hurt so bad on the drive home, but still, I was looking forward to the day when, after a lot of work, I'd once again be able to lead a normal life. Another thing I didn't expect was that my recovery was taking much longer than I thought it would. My wife Tina knew how impatient I was. There were so many times I felt like I was going nowhere.
Gord would get so frustrated about his recovery. Every time he complained, I'd remind him about where he was last week, last month, and ask if he wanted to see the picture I saved of him in the hospital.
In 2019, I started playing pickleball, and I completed my first 5K. I was walking, of course. Since then, I've completed many more.
My dad died at 47 and has passed and told me I should always appreciate life. Now, with the new life my transplant's given me, I appreciate it even more. My days are fuller, and there's so much I want to do and accomplish. I want to thank the doctors, nurses, and the tremendous post-transplant team at UHN who helped me, as well as my friends who've always been there for me. But I really couldn't have made it through all this if it wasn't for my wife Tina, who went above and beyond anything anyone could expect of a partner. And in the years since my transplant, my son Ken and his partner Jasmine gifted me with a grandson, Senan. Yes, life is good.
Congratulations, Gord. Thank you so much. So we've got some time, and I'm going to, these were some prompting questions that I thought I would put out, but maybe what I'll do is stop my share so that we can all sort of see each other in a larger group again. We've got a few minutes. Our filmmakers are here, and questions for the filmmakers especially, or other things that people noticed or want to discuss.
We did get a question in the chat. Maybe that can start us off as well. From Anita. Anita was wondering specifically from Gordon and Bill, maybe about what motivated you to participate in the project to begin with, and what you were initially hoping to get out of the project.
I'll jump in. I will do anything for the team at UHN. If you folks ask me to do anything, help with anything, ever, I will not hesitate to be there. I have such gratitude for the whole network and everything they've done for me, and that's why I jumped in. It's just kind of, yeah, I owe it to you guys. I owe you guys more. Yeah.
you, Bill.
I'm very much the same way. I volunteered for blood work, extra blood work to be drawn from me, and different research projects that came from different directions. So I'm like Bill, I'll do anything for it. I do know that one of my biggest motivations was for this particular project was the films I saw when I was going through mine seemed to be more from the 50s and 60s and didn't really show anything from our perspective, like the transplant recipient's perspective and what we're going through. So I really wanted to show the reality of it, that you're going to have low points and it's not an easy road, but you'll have a positive ending. And so I just really wanted to show it from that aspect, a modern aspect and a hopeful aspect.
I'm Canadian. These are all Canadian experiences, which often varies from the information and the resources that we find out there. So I find these very, very valuable in that way as well.
I've heard that, Donna, from others too, and other parts of the project where we're doing kind of more conventional interviews, that people would sort of describe trying to find kind of whatever they could, joining Reddit feeds and Facebook groups. But then if they were, groups that were American, there were some things that were helpful about that, but there were other things that were not necessarily as informative or didn't quite match what people wanted to know.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
And Bill, one thing that's really interesting as you reflect on that about wanting to sort of have this sort of, something that was going to speak to your experience. I was thinking about how you had chosen the point of view, like that sort of framing that you had of your shots was from the sort of your own sort of first person like point of view, right? When you were like walking through the door, it's like the person who's watching the film is doing that.
Yeah, it just that's it. Mine was originally about 28 minutes long, and so getting it down to 2 minutes is, yeah, and that's that was for me incredibly valuable because I tend to make everything bigger than it needs to be, and brings it down to focus, and the focus is me for that. Yeah, it's from my perspective. The music is interesting because my main purpose, I have ADHD and I live my life like I do. And that scares off an awful lot of people when they first meet me. So the purpose of the music a lot for me was just to calm me down and put me in a very calm place as I told what I think should be a really calmly told story from somebody who's so the music helped me as well.
And there's a question in the chat from Patricia about the metaphor of spare parts. And I think this also maybe extends to Bill, because you're making a quilt. So there's all these different pieces and parts to the quilt that you're piecing together and ironing. And so Patricia was wondering how this was a component and of how you felt about your transplant as well, or not?
Quilt making is what I do. It's my happy place. It's how I stay calm. It's how I focus. It's also how I tell stories. And so the whole experience for me is in a lot of my quilts. And it's just been a really good way for me to be able to do things. And it is really similar because quilts and life just kind of all weave everything together, little pieces put into one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that we're also interested in as a research team, is thinking about those kinds of there's the sort of the parts coming in and out of the car, but then there's the transformation of the whole to something that actually is able to go again. With the quilt, you've got a kind of, you've got parts, but the whole is sort of bigger than that. And there's like something that's different that's happened through the story of the quilt. And so there's something that's really interesting about sort of seeing those visuals.
Mm-hmm. I am mindful of time, so if anyone has to step off, but maybe I'm wondering, Suze, we can um, maybe talk about what the next steps are for the Frictions and Temporalities program, which
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And thanks, Chloe, for that. And so as the Frictions project was a 2-year project that we managed to extend to being about a 4-year project. And so we still are doing work with arts-based workshops. So if people are based in Toronto and they're interested in taking part in an art workshop, we are running another series of those in March, and we're doing a lot of data analysis at this point. But we're also in the midst of trying to find different ways to mobilize all of these arts outputs. So one of the things that we had done in this past December was we had a show, an art exhibition with one of the artists in residence, as well as some of the other pieces that have been created as part of the project that was with the CDTRP at the annual meeting. I think we're hoping to do more of that. We have lots of different ways that we're trying to kind of creatively and accessibly mobilize the different kind of findings. So Chloe also just had a paper get published, which was mentioned in the CDTRP newsletter. So if you're interested in more about the methodologies of things like the discourse analysis and the digital stories, but there's sort of more to come. And I think we're also looking toward what are the other kinds of issues and next steps that we might like to do, and where we want to kind of go to next is sort of an ongoing discussion within our group, and we're often looking for and interested to collaborate with people across different centers. So I'm happy to also hear more about whether you're at your own location, you'd like to, of a group who would like to sort of see more about things like these sorts of outputs. Thanks so much, Donna.
Any last questions or burning questions or comments and feedback from anyone?
Well, thanks, Patricia. Gord, thank you. I know Bill had to step away right at 4. Gord, thank you so much. We also are sharing more information about the CDTRP with people who are taking part in the project. And so, if from folks there, if you feel like the patient, family and donor forum is a good place for also showcasing some of this, we'd be happy to chat more about that.
Think it would be amazing if you could do, sorry, everything's coming out all at once. There was an art-based researcher that I saw her present. She's a nursing PhD from Georgetown, and she did a project, and it was on communication and healing and the different types of arts. And she traveled, she went to Paris, she went to London, she was from the US, based in Georgetown University, and how the different type of arts and the communications that she used to describe their healing process. And they had different communications between the one project she did. They had adults in Paris had to email the children in a different program. I think they were in the US, and that then they would create based on what was emailed to them. So they had to interact with technology and to create art. And it was part of their healing process, because these were people who were in the hospital and they were having to overcome all these barriers and interaction. It was interesting, but I digress. but that could be one example to go to. Just, I don't know, it just struck me how there was a common theme through all of the stories, and it's one that I've experienced myself. But it would be really nice to be able to communicate while you're in the hospital or while you're healing, because you feel so isolated. My program doesn't have patient supports that UHN has.
Mm-hmm. And happy to follow up with you more about that, because one of the things that we maybe you'll be interested at the CDTRP meeting that's going to be happening. We're trying to have a small group of people get together for a kind of pre-meeting that's going to be around arts-based work in the therapy space, more related to pediatric transplant, but how to sort of build a kind of national sort of something that's more accessible, regardless of whether you're in, if you're in Toronto, there's a lot of things that are accessible versus if you're in, a more rural area or wherever you're based out of. So that was with a focus on pediatrics, but I think that some of the overall work might be of interest to everyone.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I think I saw that. Anyways, you have my email. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah. That sounds good.
Although it is full at the moment, I have to excavate.
Thanks, Donna. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and great to see you all. Please feel free to reach out.